Welcome, and in this second part of creating a custom level editor in Unity, we will be continuing in our level builder script by doing all the code that will make the UI for the custom editor window. First, we'll create this toolbar, which allows for switching between these three tabs. First, you will want to create an int variable that stores the index of the currently active tab from the toolbar. Then you also want to initialize a string array that stores the different text of the different tabs in the toolbar, and will also determine how many tabs there will be in the toolbar. Then you will want to create a toolbar by doing GUI layout.toolbar in the onGUI method and putting in our two variables in as parameters. You will also have to make the int variable equals this method so that the index gets updated whenever you click on a different tab. Then you will have to create three new methods where we'll draw the three different tabs. Then in the onGUI method, using if and else if statements, we'll call these draw methods when depending on what tab is selected. Next, we will be setting up the setup tab by making the fields that you will be able to edit for customizing the build area. First, we'll initialize a GUI style, which will make our text look similar to what it looks like when you use the header attribute. We update the GUI style in enable so that it happens whenever you need it, and because you can't have these updated, initializing them up like this. You will also need to initialize a vector3 for the starting position of the build area, and a string for the name of the parent game object of the nodes that is created at the origin pose. Then you will need two ints, one for the width and one for the length of the build area, and initialize a float for the size of the tiles. You will also need two GUI contents, which will be for the text of the two labels we'll be adding. You can also use a string, but we are using a GUI content since you can't use a GUI style without a GUI content in the label. First, in our draw setup tab, we will be creating a label which we'll use two of our variables, one of our GUI contents for the text of the label, and the GUI style that we create. Then we will create a vector3 field with origin location as the label for this field and origin pose as the value of this field. Then we will create a text field with origin name as the label and our origin name as the value. Like we did for the toolbar, we will have to make these equal to the method in order for them to properly be updated. Then we create a gap between these two sets of GUI by doing the space. Then we create another GUI label with the other GUI content for the text and our GUI style. And we make two int sliders, one with a level width as its label and the other with a level length for its label. Then we also give them their respective variables. We also give them a min and max with a min of 1 and a max of 100. We also create a slider with a label of tile size, which we set to as its value of tile size, and set its min to 1 and max to 100. Next, we will add a button that when you click it, it will create the build area and all of the nodes in the build area. In our draw setup tab method, we'll add a button with the text create build area. And when the button is clicked, we will call the method that will called create build area. In this private method called create build area, we will first create a new game object. Then, with that game object as a reference, we will set its position to our origin post variable. Then we will set the game object's name to the origin name variable on this script. After that, we will add the build area that we created to our game object and keep it as a reference. With our build area reference, we'll set its size variable to our width and length variable we created in this script as a new vector2. Then for the reference to the build area, we'll set its tile size variable to this script's tile size variable. After that, in the build area, we will run the build nodes method, which will add all of the build nodes. And then finally, we will use the editor utilities setDirty function to make it that we are able to save the changes that we made. Without this, we would not be able to save it. Next, we'll be creating 3 methods that we need in order to be able to draw the tiles and props tabs. In our getPreviewTextDraw method, we will be using AssetPreview.getAssetPreview to return a texture 2D of a game object, which will be our prefabs. What AssetPreview.getAssetPreview does is turn a 2D texture of this that you see in the assets folder. In our getObjectsPath method, we'll use AssetDatabase.findAssets to get a string array of GUIDs. In the findAssets method, we have 2 parameters. One, which is a filter that looks for the type of game object. And the second is a string array, which has the path that we will look for, which will use our asset/level base folder which is our base folder we created in the last episode, and then also the folder parameter for this method. Then, if the GUID.length is less than or equal to 0, we will return null, as there is no game objects that meets our conditions that were found. if we meet this condition, then we will make a list. You have to make sure you are using system.collections.generic. After making the list, we will go through all of the GUIDs in our GUIDs string array, and we'll return a path by doing assetDatabase.GUID to assetPath, which changes the GUID to the path to the asset. And then we add the path to our paths list. After we go through all of the GUIDs, it will then return our paths list as an array. In our getObjects method, we will first check if the paths string array equals null or if it's empty. If it is, it will return null. If that isn't the case, then we will create a GameObject list. Then in a for each loop, we'll go through all of the paths in the paths string array. Then we'll get the GameObject from the path by doing assetDatabase.loadAssetAtPath, which requires a assetPath parameter and a system.type parameter. So we have our path, and we do type of GameObject to make sure that it is a GameObject. Then, so that we can have it start as a variable, we cast it as GameObject. And then we add our GameObject to the FoundObjects list. Then we return our list as an array. Next, we will create the Tiles and Props tab, modified the script so that instead we will use a Draw Selection tab instead of individual methods for both, since their scripts are pretty much the same. In the onGUI method, I made that the Draw Selection tab is called with a string for the tab that it is. At the top of the script, we need two more variables that are ints. One for the currently selected tile and one for the currently selected props indexes. In our Draw Selection tab method, we want to use assetDatabase.isValid folder to make sure that we actually have a folder at the right location. So we're making sure that we have the props and tiles folders in our level builder folder. If we don't have a valid folder, we'll then draw a error message using a help box in our editor window, and then we will return, ending the method. After that, we will get our prefabs by doing our getObjects and getObjectsPath methods, and in the getObjectsPath method, putting the tab as our parameter. We will then check if the prefab's GameObject array, if it equals null. And if it is equal to null, we will use helpbox to draw an error message. These help boxes can have any message you want and should have the message type error after the string. Then after that, we will make a GUI contents list, and then for each of our prefabs in the prefabs array, we will check if the prefab equals null, and we'll continue if it does. Then we will use our getPreview texture with the prefab we are looking at, save as a reference of texture2D, and then use that reference in making a new GUI content with our preview texture and the name of our prefab as a tooltip. Then we turn our GUI content list into an array. Then if our tabs equals tiles, we will make a selection grid through GUI layout.selectionGrid that uses our selected tile index as its value to determine what one is selected, our contents array to determine the contents of the grid and how many grid parts there are, and then a 3 for the columns there are in the selection grid. And then in the else, we do it for the props, but with our selected prop index. And then we do the equals to the selection grid in both cases, again, for making it that the value gets updated. Last thing we need to for this video is add our props to our props script and our tiles to our tiles script. And with that, you'll have the Setup tab, which will allow you to create a build area with custom configurations, be able to select a tile and select props, and be able to define your props and tiles by putting them in a specific folder in the Assets folder. In the next video, we'll be finishing up the level builder by making it that you can add the tiles to your build area and adding the props to the build area.